On January 17, 1980, the body of a young woman was found dumped in a lonely, snow-covered field, just off a quiet highway. Her wrists had been bound, she had been sexually assaulted, and she had been stabbed in the back 9 times. The police who arrived at the scene quickly realized this was no random tragedy. Everything pointed to one disturbing realization. This young woman had been kidnapped during what should have been a short, safe walk home from her bus stop. As detectives searched the area, they found her long blue coat lying nearby, and on it was something that would become the lifeline of the entire investigation, a sample of semen left behind by her killer. It seemed like the case would break wide open right there. But this was 1980, and the forensic technology of the time was nowhere near advanced enough to use that sample to identify anyone. Still, all hope was not lost. A woman driving through the area that night had seen a man near the very field where the body would later be found. She agreed to be put under hypnosis, and with her help, a police sketch artist created a composite image of a possible suspect. That sketch was shared across the state. Newspapers ran it. Police followed up on tip after tip, and yet no one was ever arrested. The trail went cold, and it would stay cold for more than 40 years, until a beer jug that had nothing to do with the crime scene finally cracked the case wide open. This is the tragic story of Helene Pruszynski, and how a simple mug of beer, drunk in a bar 4 decades later, exposed the man who killed her. If you are new to this channel, this is exactly the kind of case we love to dig into. Cold, forgotten murders that everyone thought would never be solved, until they finally were. If stories like this interest you, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next one. Helene Pruszynski grew up far from Colorado, on Long Island, New York. The youngest of 3 children born to Chester and Henrietta Pruszynski. Her father was an Army veteran turned engineer, and her mother kept the family grounded. She had an older sister, Janet, 9 years her senior, and an older brother, Chet, 12 years older. As a little girl, Helene fell hard for baseball, cheering on the New York Mets and memorizing every player on the roster like it was second nature to her. Everything changed in 1972, when her father took a new job and moved the family to the small town of Hamilton, Massachusetts, a quiet community northeast of Boston with fewer than 7,000 residents. This was supposed to be a good thing, but sadly, it would turn out to be the family's biggest mistake. Helene adjusted quickly, the way kids often do. She traded her loyalty to the Mets for the Boston Red Sox, and by high school, she had thrown herself into music and the stage, always the type to get involved, rather than sit on the sidelines. When it came time for college, Helene enrolled at Wheaton College, where she chose to study journalism. Those who knew her back then would later describe her as a go-getter, someone who did not wait for opportunities to fall into her lap, but instead went out and made things happen. That drive would soon carry her farther from home than anyone in her family expected. While at Wheaton, Helene learned about an internship opportunity more than 1,800 miles away, at a radio station in Denver, Colorado. It was the kind of chance that could launch the career she had been dreaming about. After talking it over with her family, Helene made a bold decision. She was going to move across the country, on her own, to chase it. She would not be entirely without support. Her aunt and uncle lived nearby, in the town of Englewood, and they offered to let her stay with them while she completed the internship. A close friend from school, a young woman named Kitsy Snow, was also heading out to Colorado around the same time for an internship of her own, which gave Helene at least one familiar face nearby. The internship was with Cow Radio in Denver, working in the news department. Helene had barely been in the state 2 weeks, and already she was proving herself. She had covered a major breaking story just the day before her life changed forever, the aftermath of the shooting of a Secret Service agent inside a Denver federal building. It was heavy, high-stakes journalism, and Helene had handled it well. Getting to and from work was not easy. She had to ride 2 separate buses, covering 11 miles each way, just to make it to the station and back. But she never let the grind slow her down. She was focused. She was determined. She believed she was exactly where she was supposed to be. No one around her could have guessed just how short that chapter of her life would turn out to be. January 16th, 1980, started out like any other workday for Helene. She clocked in at Cow, put in her shift in the newsroom, and around 5:30 in the evening, she wrapped up for the day. Before heading out, she stopped to chat briefly with a coworker. It was a small, unremarkable moment, the kind of thing that happens at the end of 1,000 ordinary workdays. No one had any reason to think it might be one of the last conversations anyone would ever have with her. Helene followed the same routine she always did. She walked 2 blocks from the station to the corner of 14th Avenue and Broadway and climbed onto her usual RTD bus for the ride toward Englewood. She was seen on that bus, right on her regular route, just like any other night. She was supposed to get off near a pizza restaurant close to the corner of Union Avenue and Broadway, then walk a short distance, just a handful of blocks, to her aunt and uncle's house. It was a walk she had made many times already in her short weeks in Colorado. She should have been home by around 6:30 in the evening. She never arrived. As the evening wore on, and Helene still had not shown up, worry started to creep over the household. Her aunt, her uncle, and her friend Kitsy Snow all felt it building. At first, they told themselves there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe she missed her stop. Maybe she stayed late at the station. But as the minutes stretched into hours, that comfort started to fall apart. They got in the car and drove to the bus stop. Nothing. They drove up and down Broadway, scanning the sidewalks, hoping to spot her walking. Still nothing. They called the radio station, hoping someone there could tell them she had simply stayed behind. No answer that helped. Finally, with dread setting in, they called the police. They also picked up the phone to call Helene's parents back in Massachusetts. It was the kind of call no parent ever wants to receive. Chester and Henrietta did not hesitate. They booked the first flight they could get and headed for Colorado, desperate to help search for their daughter. Back at the house, Kitsy Snow tried to process what was happening by writing in her journal, torn between trying to stay calm and fearing the absolute worst. It was now hours since Helene should have walked through the door, and there was still no sign of her anywhere. By the time an Englewood police officer arrived to take the missing persons report, Helene had already been gone for about 4 hours. The officer jotted down a basic description on the back of a photograph: her height, her weight, her hair and eye color, and the clothes she had been wearing that day, including a distinctive long blue coat. Nobody in that house that night, and no officer writing down those details, could have imagined that it would take nearly 40 years for the truth to finally come out. The next morning, the search for Helene took a devastating turn. A woman was driving along a rural road in northern Douglas County when her 13-year-old son suddenly called out that he saw something in the field beside them. She looked over. Scattered patches of snow lay across the brown scrubland, and among them was something that looked disturbingly like a body. She flagged down a man operating road equipment nearby and asked him to check. As he got close, there was no more doubt. It was a woman, and she was dead. Within 2 hours, investigators from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation had descended on the field. What they found was horrifying. The young woman had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. Her hands had been bound behind her back, and her identity was confirmed almost immediately. A local sheriff's deputy, who also worked part-time at Cow Radio, arrived at the scene and instantly recognized her. It was Helene Pruszynski. Investigators worked the field carefully, searching for anything that might explain what had happened. Along the edge of the road, they found tire tracks left by a vehicle. In the snow leading out into the field, they discovered 2 sets of footprints heading away from the road, and only 1 set coming back. That returning set appeared to have been left by cowboy boots. They collected whatever physical evidence they could find, scattered nearby. An empty milk carton, a piece of bread, an old can. Investigators photographed everything and made plaster casts of both the tire tracks and the footprints, hoping these details might one day point them toward a suspect. And then came the piece of evidence that would matter more than any other, though no one realized it at the time. On the long blue coat Helene had been wearing, investigators recovered a semen sample left by her attacker. In the world of 1980, this alone could not identify a killer. DNA profiling as we know it today simply did not exist yet. But it was preserved carefully, tucked away as evidence, almost as if someone somewhere had a hunch it might matter someday. Just as the case seemed destined to run cold immediately, a break came from an unexpected source. A woman came forward, saying she had been driving along that same road the night Helene disappeared, right around the time she vanished. She said she had seen a man in the very area where the body would later be discovered. She gave investigators a description. A man somewhere between 20 and 30 years old, possibly white, with medium-length brown hair worn over his ears, and possibly a mustache. It was something, but it was vague. Investigators wanted more detail, so they made an unusual move for the time. They had the witness undergo hypnosis, hoping it would help her recall sharper details of the man's face. It worked, at least partially. Under hypnosis, she provided enough specifics for a sketch artist to draw a strikingly detailed composite image. The picture showed a Caucasian man with dark hair, light-colored eyes, and a mustache. It was circulated throughout the state. Newspapers ran it. Investigators hoped someone, somewhere, would recognize the face. No one ever did. Detectives were not about to give up easily. They considered whether Helene's murder might be connected to other recent attacks in the area. Just a couple of weeks before her death, a woman had been raped not far from the bus stop where Helene would have gotten off that night. And on the very same evening, Helene disappeared. Another woman had reportedly been accosted on the street nearby. It seemed entirely possible these crimes were connected, the work of the same dangerous man roaming the same stretch of road. Investigators questioned people. They canvassed the neighborhood. They followed up on every scrap of information that came in. The problem was, Helene had lived in Colorado for less than 3 weeks before she was killed. She was a stranger there, with no history of conflict, no known enemies, no jealous exes, nothing that might point towards someone with a motive. That meant, in all likelihood, she had been attacked by a complete stranger, and stranger attacks are some of the hardest crimes in the world to solve, because there is no obvious thread connecting victim and killer. Officials publicly admitted they were doing everything they possibly could to run down every lead, but they also acknowledged just how difficult a case like this one was, especially when the victim had only just arrived in town. The radio station where Helene had worked even offered a reward for information leading to an arrest. It did not produce a single useful tip. Detectives poured hour after hour into the investigation. They followed up on the vehicle tracks. They followed up on the cowboy boot prints. They followed up on the composite sketch. None of it led anywhere. Weeks passed, then months. The following year, despite every ounce of effort investigators had thrown at the case, it officially went cold. Eventually, homes were built on the very land where Helene's body had been found. Life moved on around the empty space she had left behind, even as the people who loved her and the detectives who had fought for her never truly let the case go. Helene's case did not stay completely forgotten. In 1998, nearly 20 years after her murder, investigators reopened the file. A newly formed task force, made up of officers from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, the Englewood Police Department, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, went back through every piece of evidence collected in 1980. They discovered something surprising. None of the physical evidence had ever actually been tested for DNA. That testing finally happened in 1998, producing a genetic profile of the killer for the very first time. Investigators uploaded it into the FBI's National CODIS database, hoping for a match against a known offender. There was none. The case was picked up and re-examined again in 2000, in 2005, in 2010, and once more in 2013. That last attempt used the DNA profile to identify 8 women who might have been distantly related to the killer, but that lead went nowhere as well. Year after year, decade after decade, the same result. Effort after effort, and still, nothing solid to hold on to. Then, in 2017, a new team of investigators picked the case back up, determined to try once more. This time, they had a tool no one had ever had access to before. By the late 1980s, DNA evidence had transformed criminal investigations, but it came with a frustrating limitation. If investigators had a suspect in mind and could compare a DNA sample directly to that person, it could crack a case wide open. But if they had no suspect at all, a DNA profile alone could sit in a database for years, or even decades, without ever finding a match. Then came a shift nobody in law enforcement had predicted. Ordinary people, by the millions, began sending in cheek swabs to home DNA testing companies, hoping to learn about their ancestry or track down long-lost relatives. And investigators realized something remarkable. Even if a killer's own DNA was not sitting in a criminal database, one of his relatives might have voluntarily uploaded theirs to an ancestry website, just out of curiosity. This gave birth to a technique known as genetic genealogy. Detectives would take DNA recovered from an unsolved crime scene and upload it to open genealogy databases. If they were lucky, they would get a list of people who shared some genetic connection to their unknown suspect. From there, painstaking, old-fashioned detective work would begin, building family trees, branch by branch, generation by generation, hoping to eventually land on the right name. A Douglas County investigator named Shannon Jensen took on Helene's case in 2019 and quickly discovered just how enormous that task could be. Her very first search returned 3,000 people connected in some way to the killer's DNA. Most were distant relations, 7th or 8th cousins, far too removed to be of any real use. But buried within that massive web of names were closer relatives, people who might actually lead somewhere. Jensen worked her way down through the branches, eventually reaching a distant cousin who had access to family DNA profiles she had not yet found. That cousin was willing to help, and slowly, painstakingly, the family tree began to narrow. There were dead ends along the way. Investigators traveled to Arizona to check out one possible suspect, secretly collecting a discarded water bottle for testing. It came back with no match. They then turned their focus to a man with a documented history of troubling sexual behavior. His DNA, too, failed to match the sample from Helene's case. But that man had a younger brother. The brother's name was Curtis Allen White. As Jensen dug into his history, disturbing details began to surface. In 1975, he had been convicted of raping a woman at knife point in Arkansas. He had arrived in Colorado in 1979, and at some point in 1982, he had changed his name entirely, becoming known from that point forward as James Curtis Clanton. The pieces were falling into place almost too perfectly. Clanton had been living in the Denver area at the exact time of Helene's murder. He had a documented history of committing a violent sexual assault involving a knife, and when investigators compared his background to the composite sketch created back in 1980, the resemblance was striking. Jensen was certain. She brought her findings to Lieutenant Tommy Barella, an experienced officer who was newer to cold case work. She told him she knew who the killer was. There was only one thing left, standing between the investigation and an arrest. They needed Clanton's actual DNA to confirm the match beyond any doubt. By November of 2019, Clanton was no longer living in Colorado. He had relocated to north-central Florida, working as a long-haul truck driver near a small town called Lake Butler. Douglas County investigators traveled there and began quietly watching him, waiting for an opportunity to collect a DNA sample without tipping him off. For more than a week, they followed him, watching his routine, waiting for the right moment. Finally, it came. Clanton walked into a bar not far from his home, ordered a beer, poured it into a mug, and drank. He then ordered another and did the same. After he left, investigators moved in and collected the abandoned mug he had left behind. They rushed it back to Colorado for testing at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. When the results came back, there was no ambiguity left. The DNA on that beer jug matched the DNA recovered from Helene's body and clothing nearly 40 years earlier. After decades of dead ends, false starts, and disappointment, investigators finally had their man. On December 11, 2019, two Douglas County investigators, Sergeant Attila Denz and Detective Mike Trindle, waited along a quiet Florida road for Clanton to arrive in his truck. When he pulled up and stepped out, they approached him with a carefully constructed cover story. They told him his name had come up in connection with a major financial fraud case back in Colorado, and that they believed someone might have stolen his identity. They asked if he would come in for a recorded interview to help clear things up. Clanton agreed. None of it was true. It was a calculated strategy designed to get him talking freely, locking him into specific details about his life in Colorado in 1980, details he could not later take back or explain away. For roughly an hour, the questioning continued, calm and low-key. Then, finally, one of the detectives turned the conversation toward the real reason they were there. He told Clanton there was more to this than any financial case, and that they actually needed to ask him about a young woman from Colorado back in 1980. A photograph of Helene was placed on the table in front of him. Clanton's demeanor shifted instantly. He said he wanted a lawyer. He was informed that they had a warrant for his arrest on charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. When he protested that they had the wrong man, detectives told him plainly that they had his DNA, recovered from Helene's body. Moments later, he was placed in handcuffs and led away. The following day, Clanton did something that surprised even the investigators who had built the case against him. Rather than fighting extradition, he agreed to waive it and fly voluntarily back to Colorado to face the charges. On the way to the airport, riding alongside Lieutenant Tommy Barella, Clanton said he wanted to talk. Barella began recording. He asked Clanton whether he had understood, during that earlier interview, that they were really asking about a murder. Clanton admitted that he had. When asked why he thought that, he said he had always known it would eventually catch up with him. Then he said it outright. He had killed the young woman they were accusing him of killing. From there, across the car ride and the flight back to Colorado, Clanton kept talking, laying out in his own words exactly what had happened on that January night, nearly 40 years earlier. He described watching Helene get off the bus and making the decision, in that instant, to turn his car around and go back for her. He told her he had a knife. She saw it and did not fight him. He told her to climb into the passenger floorboard, bound her hands, and drove her away. At first, he claimed he was kidnapping her for money, though he later admitted that had never been the real plan. He drove her to a wooden shed, where he raped her. Afterward, he took her out to the field along Daniels Park Road. He told her to walk barefoot across the snow, promising he would let her go once she reached the other side. Once there, he told her to kneel down and wait for him to leave. Instead, he stabbed her in the back 9 times. He described a strange, detached feeling as he did it, as though he were somehow stepping outside of himself to watch it happen from a distance. Clanton also spoke about his childhood, a difficult and disturbing one. He said he had been abandoned by his mother and spent time in a foster home with a man who abused children. He described a rage that had lived inside him since he was very young, one he said he never fully understood, one that had led him to hurt animals as a small child and had never truly gone away. In late February of 2020, after prosecutors agreed to take the death penalty off the table, Clanton stood in a Colorado courtroom and pleaded guilty. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, his final sentencing hearing was delayed for months. When it finally took place in July, Clanton appeared over video from the Douglas County Jail rather than in person. Everyone in that virtual courtroom already knew the outcome. His guilty plea meant a mandatory life sentence. But the hearing was not just about announcing a punishment. It was a chance, finally, for the people who had spent 40 years grieving Helene to speak. Her sister, Janet Johnson, the only member of her immediate family still alive, told the court that when the phone call came decades earlier, telling them Helene was gone, it felt like someone had reached into their chests and torn their hearts out. Friends described Helene as warm, creative, and full of promise, the kind of person everyone in a room gravitated toward. One friend recalled the years of nightmares that followed her murder. Another said that the pain of losing her in such a brutal way was something she had never been able to fully make peace with, even decades later. Clanton did not speak for himself. He let his attorney read a brief statement of apology on his behalf, and he lowered his head as a slideshow of photographs from Helene's life played in the courtroom, set to a recording of her old college singing group. The presiding judge told Clanton that what he chose to do with the rest of his life, from that point forward, was entirely up to him. James Curtis Clanton was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Helene Pruszynski. Because of the laws that were in place back in 1980, he does technically remain eligible to apply for parole after serving 20 years behind bars. Prosecutors have said publicly that given his age, they do not expect that parole will ever actually happen. Investigators have also continued looking into whether Clanton may have been responsible for other unsolved sexual assaults from that same era in Colorado. For Helene's sister Janet, the arrest and conviction brought a measure of peace, but not the closure she once hoped for. She has said that no verdict could ever bring her sister back, and that the emptiness left by her loss will remain with her family forever. What she does have now is the knowledge that the man responsible for taking her sister's future away will spend the rest of his life in prison. Helene Pruszynski never got the journalism career she had crossed the country to build. She never got to grow old, to see the stories she might have one day reported on, or the life she might have lived. But because a small group of investigators refused to let her case truly die, even across 40 years of dead ends, disappointment, and silence, the truth about what happened to her finally came out. And it all traced back to a single mug of beer, left behind on a bar counter in Florida, thousands of miles and nearly 4 decades from the snowy field where it all began. If this story moved you, or if you want to see more cold cases that finally got cracked, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. And if you have thoughts on this case, drop them in the comments below. We read every single one.